Hi, everybody. It's me. I'm back after pretty much an eventful week for me, but eventually everything got resolved. And yeah, I'm back at shooting videos. And as I promised, I want to shoot one video about the Uli Sigg collection at the M Plus, the Uli Sigg wing. And this video is primarily aimed for the people that are overseas. I want to give them an introduction of what is being exhibited and the context of that exhibition. This has been, by the different media, there have been a lot of interpretations of that exhibition. So I want to present my take. And it's very close to the curators in itself. I have, as people know, I'm a docent at the M Plus Museum. I'm a guide at the M Plus Museum. So I had the opportunity to discuss the exhibition and the works with the leading curators, Mr. Pili, and with Mr. Uli Sigg himself. So yeah, this is it. Come along and I hope you enjoy it. So the Uli Sigg Gallery is located in the second floor of the museum, and galleries in itself is quite a large space. It comprises 10 different rooms, one being for an annex, and the other 9 being for the exhibition in itself, which is organized in chronological order, starting from the late 1970s when China adopted an open door policy following the death of Mao and in the transition of power into Deng Xiaoping, and ending around 2010 roughly with radical performance and the effects of urbanism, Beijing Olympics, and etc. The exhibition in itself, what I found that quite interesting, and I think my main take is that besides exploring like the reasons and the rationale and perhaps the background or the 3 artistic expressions that are being explored, which is cynical realism, political pop, and radical performance, is trying to give you like the background of the background that led into these expressions, but it's also exploring like the impact of that radical change, that open door policy that took place in the 70s. That change in mentality and pretty much in a belief system, how radical it was and how transformative it was for Chinese society overall. China, during that period, which is a period of pretty much 40 years, underwent an incredible transformation at all levels, not only socially or artistically, but also economically, as we know, like especially the biggest boom in the 2000s, given after the full adoption of the globalization, and also like on the social belief system in itself, coming from a strong belief system of a political ideology that is your identity, pretty much reinforcing the Cultural Revolution, the abandonment of that, and then the adoption of capitalism, pretty much, and making money the supreme ruler. You can call it in that way. I do find that exploration super interesting, and when you discuss with the curators, I discussed this with Billy and the assistant curators, even with Mr. Uli Sigg. I attended a talk of about 20 people. 30 people. We were there when he was giving us a talk around the works. Their main purpose is to document that transformative process that under China went culturally, and I think it's a beautiful exercise. And I think that clears a lot of like misunderstandings or misconceptions that have been, or framings. I think that's the better word, framings about this exhibition. There's a lot of framings that I think, in my opinion, are a bit inaccurate, because this exhibition is not about it's not about politics, or it's not about particular angles or narrowing into a particular point of view. Is more about overall social change, that it could happen anywhere. So the first work that I want to introduce, which is in the first room, in a room called 1985 New Wave, is a work by Guangyi, and the work is called Mao Zedong Red Grid Number 2. And this work is actually quite interesting. The work was actually produced in 1989, and it's probably give or take 10 years after the adoption of, or a few years, yeah, well, less than a decade or a decade after the adoption of open door policy. There's a lot of like influence coming from the West. There's a lot of exchange of ideas. There's a lot of expressions, especially artistic expressions, being absorbed, especially Western artistic expressions, and also information. There's a lot of books, literature, everything is coming into China. Artists are becoming like sponges, responding to all this. They're responding to that strong sense of individual artistic expressions. And this work, what I like it is because there's also you see the grid, so the face of Mao in the background, and there's a grid that has like the other two letters of the name Mao. So effectively, the way to interpret this work is that the letter M is the face of the Mao in itself, and then you can read it from up and down or whatever. You can just see that it's sort of like a sequence. And what this work for me, like my take of this work, is that transition, that there's a period there, that there's a grid represented in color, which color is a very strong has a strong analogy to Chinese culture. Not Chinese culture as in Chinese being like ethnic Chinese or culturally Chinese. I think there's a better term. And it's the abandonment between like the belief system of Mao, which was pretty much Cultural Revolution, like a extremely like this ideology and no deviation from it, and in a moment that is already becoming like post, right? That the artists are seeing that they can start expressing it in different ways. This work, for example, was I don't know, a few years ago, or especially during the Cultural Revolution. At that time, pretty much all the artistic expressions were primarily on social realism, but very like the very well-known propaganda works, right? Like the whole movement and cheering and so on. But this work is very different, right? It's a figurative and so on, but it's not necessarily like the traditional figurative old school people to empower people to fight for the party. It's quite different. There's a sense of like an individual opinion into this work. And what I like in this one, because it was quite telling, is 1989. I mean, China is with the artist in itself has no idea to forecast or predict the future, and somehow he realizes that the period that was during Mao has passed. The second work that I want to talk about is found in room 2, and is this very giant ink scrolls by artist Gu Wenda. The title of the work is called "Drama of Two Cultural Formats Merge." And it was produced in 1985, similar to the previous one that I just commented, more or less at the same period. And what is interesting about the work is because it's taking the traditional formality of art expressions in China. Either, as I mentioned earlier, it was either social realism or it was the traditional ink works, right? Like what we're very familiar, like the little ink works with the landscapes and cranes and so on. And he's taking those elements, especially the material, right? Like the scroll, the format, and the material in itself, which is ink. And he's expressing this in a very different way. Certainly, you can see the influence of perhaps also realism into the work in itself, which is absolutely, this is novel into China. Especially in 1985. And you can actually see that the influence that artists are taking is in not only on adopting these Western or art expressions, particularly surrealism in this case, but also that the freedom that they're feeling to start questioning what happened before. At that time, artists were questioning if the policy that occurred during the Cultural Revolution was socially correct. There was a lot of wrongdoings, and I mean, recently China actually, like, there was a plenum, a party meeting not so long ago, and they actually made an official statement about less than a month ago. They reaffirm a statement that they made a few years ago about like the wrongdoings of the Cultural Revolution. And artists at that time this work, as I said, is in 1985. They were already feeling those kind of like wrongness, if you can call it that moral wrongness, that there was something not right. And that's the reason why this works. It takes this traditional materials, incorporating these surrealist elements of this kind of like a thought, this like a new thought process, and then questioning no, there's a moral dilemma that we are confronting, and that's the reason I like it. It is quite interesting. I do want to make a remark that we are 10 years into pretty much opening, and we are already confronting those moral dilemmas. At the moment, we are not observing a particular Chinese movement in itself, a new Chinese movement in itself, but certainly these two rooms, room one and room two, are giving the audience or the attendees an ideas of what is to come. Certainly, there's a process of questioning. This work in itself is surrounded by other works where you see a lot of works by abstract expressionism, especially surrealism. They are surrounded there by other Chinese artists, and it tried to give you that context that this work was a thought process influenced by these other expressions coming in. I want to clarify that I'm presenting works that I think are culturally relevant. I'm not focusing primarily on aesthetics, so you won't find works that are very colorful or pretty or so on. I think I'm focusing primarily on works that are culturally relevant, that are key to the narrative of the exhibition in itself, which is social change. So this third work by artist Wan Peng is called 1984 Performance, and is a work where the artist is using his body to pretty much express. So he's taking he pretty much showers himself on ink, and it start pretty much going around on a canvas and on different material, and expressing himself, expressing art using his own body, similar perhaps to what Japanese artists were doing, the Gutai artists of the time, and Shirage especially, were using gesturalism to start expressing quite differently, right? They're taking one step above, which instead of using movement and action, they use their own body, like not only like the traditional ink or paint that you start like a dripping or something. You start covering your body all over, and expressing an artwork with your whole entire body as a brush. So for me, that what is interesting is about this work is the sense of freedom the artists are feeling. This work was produced in 1984, so a little bit earlier than the other two works. So probably 6 or 7 years into, 5-6 years into the open door policy, and artists are already feeling kind of like empowered to explore, so sort of like a sense of individualism. Again, as I said, this was or pretty much really underground, or heavily disencouraged in the traditional art schools, but artists are nonetheless exploring it. The rooms that follow are already defined, pretty much explored the first unique art expression coming out of that period, right? Which is political pop, right? This work, which I think is really well known globally by artist Wang Guanyi, is called The Great Criticism, Chanel. And is a classic work of political pop. And what I love about this work is because it's right in that middle point between your old belief system of primarily a political identity, which defined or symbolized here by the military, and the new belief system, right? And the race coming from behind, and the word Chanel, which is a global brand. And is that pivotal point of between letting go or your past, letting go of your old belief, which is a political belief, and then adopting a new belief, which is a commercial belief, right? Which we all know that transition that China happened especially in the 1990s, especially with globalization. China really changed the belief system. I cannot put it in another way, and that's actually how I like to present it. The belief system in China really changed, and people that are also, again, that study China extensively, they do know that China has a huge generational gap, if I can call it, in terms of a cultural gap, in terms of perception. which is the people born before the 80s and after the 80s. They are like from two different planets, right? Prior to the 80s, these people that were primarily enrooted had a strong political association. But people that were born after the 90s, they have a more financial association or economical association to reality. In fact, that's the best way to put it. And for me, this work is just key, right? It just depicts it so well. And this room, and the work I selected, the room is the room in itself is surrounded by works of political pop, right? But this worked for me because it denotes that transition between your old belief system and the new belief system. Yeah, this next work is on the other art expression that followed political pop. It was called cynical realism. This work is by an artist called Zhang Fanxi. This work that called Rainbow was produced in 1997, which is pretty much 20 odd years since the adoption of our open door policy. So it's pretty much within one generation. And you have that massive change in cultural belief, yeah, or cultural association. And that creates a social anxiety. And this is clearly depicted here. As you know, globalization and capitalism, the embracing full capitalism has its own constraints because life becomes expensive and unfair. I mean, I always said that capitalism is always is efficient, never fair. As someone of low income to see if capitalism is fair to them, but that's another story. That's for another talk. But you can clearly see that these stresses are already coming into Chinese society, right? And this is clearly depicted by works by Zhang Fanxi, by Yue Minjun, by Ai Weiwei, and so on. You can start sensing that stress in society. The next work, which in my opinion is the centerpiece of the entire exhibition, is already in. This is still in room 4, and the bottom of room 4. Room 4 is massive, by the way. It's huge. Is on the second level of room 4 and is a very large work by artist Ai Weiwei. The work is called Whitewash, and is a clear example of, in my opinion, of cynical realism. Ai Weiwei took this work is actually quite small to the scale of the actual work. The actual work is about 120 odd jars, which date from over like 1,000 or 2,000 years old. Which denotes a strong cultural identity, and not political, cultural identity. And some of the vases are being like soaked or painted with some cheap industrial white paint, right? Which also kind of like describe the stresses that China was going in, especially the moral stresses and the philosophical stresses, the existential stresses, that's the best word. The existential stresses that China was expressing at that time. Or confronting at that time, especially with the openness of globalization, like who we really are. We coming in 20 odd years ago, we have this closed door, strong belief that the party was absolutely everything and politics was ruling. Politics was technically, and we believe in almost in a techno religion type of society, to now having coming on a society where money facilitates our individualism. What I love about this work is because being cynical to all sides of the spectrum, not necessarily cynical to Chinese culture, but I think being cynical to the West, because the West at that time was started exploiting the Chinese market. It was extremely lucrative, the largest market, the largest population in the world, becoming very wealthy very quickly, and it's a society that it started being exploited. I mean, the previous work that we saw by Wang Yi, the one that the Chanel, is a clear example of that start of the exploitation, commercial exploitation. I want to be clear on that. So this work is extremely cynical in all angles. And we recently went on this meeting with Uli Sigg. Uli Sigg talked openly about these works. He was asked about out of like that 1,500 work that he donated on Chinese contemporary art, which is the one that he's much attached to, or the one that he's the closest to it. He actually mentioned this work, like it has to be whitewashed, because he mentioned that he somehow feels guilty in a way that he was the one that somewhat facilitated that initial exchange of ideas and culture that led into an exploitation. The reason, when you come to the works now, you can see that the painting is coming off, because it was industrial cheap painting, white painting, and it's now coming off. And you can see that the vase, the 2,000-year-old vase, and the material of the vase, which is clay, remains pretty much intact. So when he was asked about it, he said, like, yeah, I have a sense of guilt that I was somehow facilitated that exploitation, that misunderstanding that often people put China, or also misunderstanding, perhaps misrepresentations of Chinese culture. He somewhat felt like he facilitated that, and he feels like a sense of relief to see that the painting is coming off. That's the work in itself. It's a living work, because the painting will naturally come off over time. But the beauty of it is that the real essence of the vase, of who the culture is, or from where they come, remains intact. I found that message really beautiful. And Uli Sigg did mention that he has that sense of relief that they seeing the painting coming off and the vase remaining intact. When I started my first talk at Uli, my first official public talk at Uli Sigg, I decided to do it with this work, because I really wanted to present that message that this work is beyond politics or framing or anything, that this is cynical in all aspects of society. This work, it fits anywhere, from countries that have lived in imperialism, to post-Western movements that we see now, to even people that have felt that are being under a certain influence, or being influenced all their lives to take certain ways, but they always had that sense of discomfort, and suddenly coming into the comfort that they can peel that off. I mean, I can talk the gay community, the minorities. It has so many spins off and connotations, this work. I think this is the reason why this work is one of the greatest works in the museum overall, in the overall museum. And I'm really glad to be able to present it to the people, and also to you guys. I mean, being able to explain it this way. This work is called New Beijing by artist Wang Xingwei. The work was produced in 2001, and it was produced out of a painting out of a photo of a document that happened during the Tiananmen protest. What I like about this work are two things, right? One is it start exploring or questioning the way that people, bodies, systems address memory and historical records, yeah, and the sense of absurdism, right? And secondly, this because, as I said, the exhibition is a chronological order. This is pretty much at the end of that process, or the 1990s, which ended with that catalyst, which was Tiananmen Square, the events of the protest of Tiananmen Square. As we said, we're coming from a period of political pop that led into cynical realism. There's a sense of a social uneasiness in China. We don't know what we are. There's a lot of like a Western influence. The people, the young generation, especially the students of the time that were born pretty much post 80s. No, in that sense, it will be is the day not 1990, so they will be 17, 18 years old, correct? They have a totally different like a belief system than the people pretty much that are still under ruling. It's like you're confronting water and oil, right? And that is creating that sense of a stress that eventually led to the situation, to the protest of Tiananmen Square. What I like about this work is because it's being curated in that context, right? It's not being curated in a political sense. It's being curated in a chronological sense. that he said like that this particular event happened for a reason, and this is the reason that you can actually trace down through art expressions. And I found that, boom, right, beautiful. And that is credit to Mr. Pili. Like, this is the reason why he's one of the leading curators in the world, right? Because he manages to contextualize these works that are very sensitive so well. And as long as, and again, there's a lot of debate, like, okay, you cannot talk about this work in Hong Kong, which is actually not true. As long as you contextualize this work really well, and you don't like politicize it, propagandize it, or exploit it, I think that word for me is key, is absolutely fine to discuss an event that was a catalyst. And the reason I'm saying a catalyst is because that following work, you will understand why this particular event was so relevant for the China of the 2000s. And what I like about this work is extremely creative, right? Because they take the symbolism of the penguins, which they have no association to China whatsoever. That's from the South Pole. It becomes very absurd. Apologies, I understand. I'm laughing. Perhaps it's a natural reaction to the brilliance of this work, but I respect the victims and the event in itself. I'm not disrespecting in any way the incident in itself. So I want to be very clear on that. But I'm respecting the brilliance of the artist. This is the reason why we need to teach our kids creativity, because creative processes are there to explore the world and to rethink the world in different ways. And this work is absolutely beautiful. And this is the reason why it's exhibited in the museum. This is the reason why it's one of the landmarks in the museum. This is one of the most visited and most questioned. I love the fact that I got a lot of questions about this work because it's absolutely brilliant. I think it's taking a difficult topic and it takes elements of absurdism and presented in a way that you are like, and I have to say, this happens everywhere in the world, everywhere. As I said, like you can work on any history from Christopher Columbus to pretty much anywhere, and you always document like the way that the historical records were kept was always from one single perspective, and that absurdism is absolutely beautiful. And I love the fact that this work's presented in such a delightful, that was the word that I can find, delightful in a world that is very cynically beautiful. And then comes China in the 2000s, right? And this is actually for anybody that is into books, I strongly recommend to if you can read a book called Asia as Method. I'll put it on the image there. You will understand not only the belief system of China, but you will understand a lot of dynamics of Taiwan and Japan and so on, right? What was interesting is that because that sense of losing identity led into trying to find a new way to try to create like a cohesion, social cohesion, and a new sense of identity in one way, and that was economic expansion, and it was, we need to create a very wealthy society, so we need to keep pretty much people happy, right? We are 2000s, 8 years into coming to the Olympics, which is obviously for any country, especially for China that is coming, trying to prove himself onto the world. He needs to try the best, and he's trying to prove that it can get its people together, right? And what I like about this work, he actually, the same artist, so this work is called To Add 1 Meter to an Anonymous Mountain, which that top is absolutely beautiful, by artist Shang Wan. He also had a previous work on the Big Cynical Room, which has these faces and denoting like a family. It's called Family Tree, and it has a tale of a family and so on. Is using elements of nudity, which would denote some sort of like a transparency and abandonment of any expression of individualism. So you're having all these artists being naked and coming together collectively and having a collective force to add 1 meter to an anonymous mountain. I found that symbolism extremely beautiful, and it's a start of what is to come in China, which is that social, that new rise of Chinese nationalism is usually quite a bad word, or Chinese, or new Chinese identity that is found through economics, because the economic expansion of China, the gross wealth of China was pretty much obtained from the 2000s onwards, right? Because as China pretty much optimized globalization to the max and took millions of people out of poverty, like no other country or region in the world has done it before at that rapid space. Again, this is the 2000s. We are 70, we are 20, 30 years into the One Door policy in a space of 30 years in the 2000s, right? And we're coming into, and we have, for example, you see this work where you have that sense of identity that is very different of the sense of identity that it was just 30 years ago, that it was a political identity. And this one you have like more of you have a sense of moral identity that is fueled. Eventually, urbanism leads into economic identity. That's the best way to call it. But this only happened in 30 years. And this is, I think, a lot of people that discuss China forget to frame time. Less than a lifetime. And that is actually, for me, is so mind-blowing. I have spent a lot of time in Asia, as you know, pretty much all my adult life in Asia. And for me, I do find mind-blowing to talk to people that were raised in the Cultural Revolution and they live in extreme poverty. And they manage to raise kids, and their kids have houses, education, 2-3 cars. They have grandkids that are studying overseas. They speak 3 languages. It happened in 30 years. That is, for me, is just mind-blowing. And then seeing it documented through art expressions is like, boom, like, this is beautiful. This is the reason why this museum is so majestic, and the effort of the vision of Mr. Uli Sigg. He saw this coming somehow. He was in 1979 collecting artworks, and he saw that. Somehow he saw it. I don't know. He had a crystal ball, and who knows? This is beautiful. I mean, it's beautiful from anybody that is embracing social studies or cultural studies will realize that this is beautiful. That this process of documentation through art is a beautiful exercise, and it's kudos to the M+ and the curatorial team and Mr. Uli Sigg. So we're talking about the previous work, that sense of unity that is happening especially through urbanism and social wealth. But also that creating a new wave of stresses, which led to, so this is the beginning of perhaps the third movement that the exhibition explores, which is like the end, which is a radical performance. And this is actually my take. I discussed it with a curator, with Mr. Pili, and he told me like he doesn't necessarily see the association that I'm making. I mean, he is the expert, but he said like, yeah, but it's an interesting take, that what you are presenting. Because my take on this one is that rapid urbanization that happened in China after in the 80s, that created a lot of social stress. There were people that living in rural areas and so on, and they were pretty much asked forcefully to migrate to cities. And then you're living into this kind of like a perhaps more impoverished but very idyllic, quiet areas, like a rural area. And now you're living in perhaps a little bit more comfortable because you have utilities and running water and so on. But it's extremely condensed, right? And you're being asked to adopt to that change very radically. So that creates some sort of like a shock to you, right? And I like this work by artist Liang Xu. It's called Urban Peasants. And the reason I like this sculpture is because of the look. Because that sense of like the look is the sense of like I won't say despair, but the sense of like the faces look somehow like disoriented to me. And I sense that there's a lot of people like that were going through that transitional process. I think that was the main sense. That was the like. I wonder if that's how they felt. They had the sense of feeling disoriented, There's another work in the same wing that is this video. I'm sure I didn't take the name, but is like someone is screaming to the crowd. So there's like 1 million people walking into an alley. I think it's like a subway station, and then the artist started screaming to try to see the people's reaction, and he sees that people are kind of like becoming like a zombies, right? Which is actually widely documented globally in the cities that especially like the urbanization that happened globally in the 90s and in the 2000s in 2010s, that people feel like zombies in the cities. That so the person screams to the crowd, like millions of people, and I don't know, millions. I mean, I'm exaggerating, like I don't know, but certainly thousands. It's just a lot of people on that video, and he screams out loud, and then people turn back and like just continue walking, like and the guy screams like in a way that he sounds like could be like in distress somehow. But just people look and then continue. Like, we are like not interested. That's interesting because that gives you the sense of the lack of attention span that is growing or that grows with urbanization, right? I mean, especially we see it now with cell phones and so on, that the attention spans of kids is very, 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 very short, right? Because they are like distracted by many things. So I did find this work about that expansion into urbanization came with a trade-off, and for me was that sense of disorientation, social disorientation that was being introduced, and which actually leads into pretty much the final movement that is being explored into artistic Chinese artistic expressions, or that is being studied in this exhibition, which is radical performance. And the last work that I want to talk about, is a work which, in my opinion, is pretty controversial for real reasons, not for recharacterizations, but for real reasons. And I will explain that in a second. Is a work called Civilization Pillar by two artists, Sun Yuan and Peng Yu. The work was produced in 2001, and as you can see, is a pillar covered in human fat. What is interesting about this work, so the artist actually went to the beauty clinics, no, the cosmetic clinics and so on, and took all the human fat from liposuctions, right? Liposuctions, to make reference to that. And eventually took a pillar, which did not like, I mean, you start looking into, perhaps if you go to Egyptian or European cities, you have this, like the monoliths and so on that resembles sort of like a civilization, sort of like a stand, or even Washington and so on, sort of like a strong stand of a cultural, like a beacon of culture or so on. So he takes this pillar, right, and they decide to cover it in fat, right? And for me, and this is in a wing that is exploring radical performance. So there are works about, so the works that you see on that wing are more on the performative side, but very radical. So it's people going underwater, trying to kind of like choke underwater, or people getting branded. The very, very radical, the very graphical, very because it's trying to get people's attention. People are, as I mentioned earlier, attention spans are minimized because people living in urban environments, and artists are finding like new ways to get people's attention. And then they take this work, which if you're talking about radical performance, there's nothing more radical than covering something on human fat. But what I like about this work, and the thing I think is a pinnacle of radical performance, is because it's a criticism. Is being radical, not the artists are not being radical, is the people from where that fat came from. If you really, that's my take. If I really think about it, you're coming into a society which is like 2000, 2010s and so on, where people are physically modifying their appearances through cosmetic surgery and so on, for the purpose of attention, in order to look more appealing to society. They modify themselves, and for me that's a question. Like, who are the real radical? Is it the artist, or is it us, society? Are we becoming too radical? Are we becoming? I mean, and I can see it. I mean, I mean, you can see the criticism that happens globally. Again, this is not necessarily limited to China. This is everywhere. You can see that the obsession, perhaps, that happened with body culture, and especially like I think in the 2000s and 2010, there was this questioning about the model being like super slim and so on, and the beauty standards, and of course, in China there was an emerging beauty standard, and and talking about beauty standard, just go to Korea and you tell me if there's not like a very rigid beauty standard in Korea. And in the fact that that people, especially like and for me, that what I like about that the symbolism of this work is because you see these radical motivations for attention being explored even at a very young age. You have this very young girls. I'll frame it to girls. No, but guys, because I think it's becoming quite even now. That are modifying their bodies, the nose, the this, the that, like etc., in order to look more sexually appealing. I think that's the way, a good way to put it. But it does necessity to seek attention. What this work is trying to conclude, like this is where do we stand right now? How where society has adversely China, and because the exhibition is in China, and I want to finish it in China. China went into a transition of, and this is what 40 years into having a strong political belief. Again, 40 years, 40. Yeah, I'm 45 years old. I was born when China was a strong political belief, and I'm making this video when China believes that physical individual modification is the way to attract attention. In my lifetime, this change happened. And I think that is important when people understand this exhibition and you frame it within time, it makes it all more important. Yeah, that was it. That was the exhibition. I think this video is going to be quite long, so very likely I probably have divided in a few sections. Because I tried to do it in 10 minutes and no, that doesn't work. But usually my talks that I did is the shortest talk I did in about 45 minutes. And the first talk that I did with the private tour, it was 3 hours. And it was, again, I have to thank a lot of people because this exhibition and the talk that I'm actually giving now is coming, is I prepared this with a lot of friends from China. Because one of my biggest concerns and about, especially me, like of confronting this exhibition and presenting it, is that I'm aware that I'm a foreigner and I'm presenting topics that are very sensitive. And when I decided to invite my Chinese friends to help me out on putting this exhibition together and and what I'm presenting, is because I wanted to be very, very, very. I didn't want to be mischaracterized in any way. I wanted to be very frank, factual, and very sincere. And for me is because what I want to present here is the context, that everything came from somewhere and led to something else. I'm not taking political views. I'm not taking a particular position in any way. What I want to present is that historical context and what is it that is leading to. And I invited my friends to pretty much help me out. And for example, in my presentation, they corrected me and I said, like, perhaps you need to understand it because we went through that process, we lived through that period, and we can tell you that happened this way and rather than this way, because there's an understanding of what it was, perhaps presented in the outside world to actually what really happened. So I really wanted to be as frank and sincere and very respectful. But yeah, this is it. And really, I know that it was a super long talk, but I think it's as important. I think it's important for the people that are overseas to perhaps see the exhibition that perhaps they have been hearing a lot, and they have a particular understanding or they might have a particular view or construction of what the exhibition is about. And I wanted to present my frank view on it, and I hope you like it. I mean, again, as I always said, more now that my Instagram is back, please, you can DM me. I'm more than happy to take messages. Again, if I'm mischaracterizing something, do let me know. I'm more than happy to address those issues because, again, I mean, I'm a public guide, and my priority as a guide is to be fair, to be factual and fair, and respectful to all opinions. And that is the reason why I decided to do it. And this is the reason why I personally selected this exhibition, because I know that it was very difficult. And I decided like I'm up to that challenge, because what I'm going to learn here is more than just art history. I'm going to learn how to deal with confronting opinions and realizing that opinions, as long as they are respectful and factful, they have a space and they have a voice. Yeah, I hope you enjoyed the talk. And yeah, I hope I'm happy to hear from you guys. Okay, cheers. Bye.